Yeah, that's right. And there was a growing rebellion on the Conservative side, with MPs concerned that this Parliament would effectively just be rubber stamping a deal. They wouldn't have any say if they didn't like the deal. So ministers have clearly been toing and froing, trying to come up with a form of words that would placate those on the Conservative side. So at the beginning of proceedings today, the Minister David Jones did get up. It's all about the timing of this vote. He said that yes, they would get a vote in this place before the European Parliament signs it all off, and that was welcomed by the Labour frontbench as a big climb down, as a big concession. Since then, though, we've had a few more probing questions. Interestingly, Ken Clarke, the pro-European Conservative, he got up and said, hang on a minute, let's not be too hasty here. Let's see exactly what you're offering us. And then there have been some questions coming from the Labour side and from the SNP. So it's been a little bit heated. Let's just dip into what they're saying right now in the Commons.
He said, and I quote, "One of the virtues of the Article 50 process is that it sets you on way. It is very difficult to see it being revoked. We do not intend to revoke it. It may be revocable. I don't know." Now, that is the basis on which we're being asked to take this fundamental decision affecting the future of this country. We have to know these things because it determines the position the House will find itself in. If it's irrevocable, if after the 2 years, unless there is a unanimous agreement from the other 27 members of the European Union, then negotiations stop and the guillotine comes down and you're left with a bad deal or no deal, then any vote in the House against that sword, the Damocles hanging over the House, will not be a proper informed judgment. I'll give way to the honourable member, then I'll give way to the member.
Would he agree with me that triggering Article 50 on the basis of possible revocability is like walking down the M4 in the middle of the night and hoping you won't get killed? You might not, but better not to walk down there in the first place.
Well, the honourable member promised me he would change the motorway for his, when he next made that point, but I think the analogy is there. And of course we know that the noble Lord Kerr, who drafted Article 50, believes it to be revocable. And presumably he had this in mind when he drafted the article in the first place. Now, I promised the right honourable member, who joined the House on the same day as I did, if I remember correctly.
Oh, great. Mr. Ingle, I'm very grateful. Perhaps I can clarify. The Attorney-General was very clear in his submission to the Supreme Court that it was irrevocable and is irrevocable. So did the lawyer on the other side of the case, and the judgment was based on that very proposition. So does he agree it is irrevocable?
No. Therefore, I give way to the former Attorney-General.
The purpose of the government's concession in the Supreme Court was merely for the purpose of those proceedings. And I have to say to the right honourable gentleman that we can derive nothing from that as to whether it is revocable or not. And indeed, there is powerful legal argument that it is capable of being revoked.
Two right honourable gentlemen should talk among themselves before they come to the House with an agreed position. But in many senses, both these amazingly talented people are both on the back benches. So it doesn't really matter if they have an informed and learned debate after our proceedings. What matters is the confusion in the front bench, and the fact that whatever the right honourable member thinks, the Brexit Secretary didn't know whether it's revocable or not. And that goes to one last time for now, please.
The right honourable gentleman is pursuing this relentlessly, but could he also perhaps explain why it is that he is doing so? May I suggest that it is as follows, that he knows that on the outcome of the answer to the question he's putting depends whether or not the European Court of Justice gets its hands on this. That's what it's about, and I'm sure the honourable gentleman will accept that.
To be said I'm pursuing something relentlessly by the right honourable gentleman is a compliment. It is a compliment indeed, which I shall treasure. But no, it's not about the European Court of Justice. It's about this House having a genuine choice at some stage and looking at what the government has negotiated and then be able to say yes or no without that sword of Damocles, that bad deal or no deal, which was the threat from the Prime Minister. One last time on this side.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. Isn't one of the problems with the concession just made that it tacks together in one votable motion both the withdrawal agreement and a potential trade agreement. If members don't like the trade agreement, they then face the unpalatable option of voting down the withdrawal agreement, therefore bringing us back to where we are now in terms of the outcome of the referendum.
Well, he makes a very astute point. But if I may say so, I think the issue is even more fundamental. I think we have to know what happens when we say no before we go ahead at the present moment. Now, we make an effort in new clause 100, not now, new clause 180. A new clause 180 we call the Reset Amendment. And what that asks the Prime Minister to do is to seek from the European Council an agreement if this House and the other place refuse to agree the terms negotiated, then we reset to existing membership of the European Union on current terms and try again. Yeah. That we will only approve the deal once the terms are such that we believe they're in the interests of this country. And the Prime Minister should be prepared not to present us with a bad deal or no deal, not a bad deal or world trade terms, but a deal which we know is going to be in the interests of our constituents and the country. I think that's absolutely fundamental to this debate. I know and understand the exigencies of political leadership, but the end of March came about at the Tory conference because Brexiteers were beginning to get a bit flappy about whether the Prime Minister was a born-again Brexiteer or was he still a secret submarine Remainer. I cannot understand why people think, even from a Brexiteer side, because presumably the Brexiteers want success for this country and its economy, of thinking it's a good idea to invoke Article 50 until you know what the end destination is going to be. Similarly, I cannot believe it's a good idea to leave this European Economic Area, which is governed by different areas and different instruments, until you know what the alternative is going to be. And instead of giving these points away and putting all of the negotiating power into the hands of those you're negotiating with, and there are partners now, but any negotiation is a tension between two parties. And any negotiation depends on the cards you're going to have in your hand, and if the other side know that after 2 years that sword of Damocles comes down, it puts them in a much more powerful position in terms of the negotiation. And that's why we try. I'll go away with it tomorrow, my friend.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving me. I agree with most of what he said, and that's why it's very important we get an amendment on this so that the House knows and the public knows exactly where we're going. And in actual fact, why don't we put the government front bench on a course for the TUC to learn how to negotiate?
My honourable friend from Coventry makes an astute point. I think a lot could be learned in terms of negotiating position, and the prime point is do not put yourself in a position of weakness. Do not put yourself in a position of weakness with the European Union, who are, on the whole, honourable people, and want what's interests of the continent of Europe, and certainly it is not a good idea for the government to put themselves in a position of weakness with the new President of the United States, who will take every possible advantage from an opponent he senses, as he will sense, is negotiating from a position of weakness. So, in conclusion, Madam Chair, I would argue strongly for the new clause and the amendments we've put down, to secure the position at the end of the negotiations before we embark on something which is going to leave this House not just with a bad deal or no deal, but with a metaphorical gun pointed at its head when it comes to address these serious questions. We have to know the end position before we embark on that fundamentally dangerous course.
John Redwood.
Thank you, Ms Engel. I agree fully with the Right Honourable Member for Gordon that we should not wish to do anything that weakens or undermines the British bargaining position, and that all the efforts of this House as we try to knit together what were Remain voters and Leave voters should be designed to maximising our leverage as a newly independent nation and securing the best possible future relationship with our partners in the European Union, which is why I find myself in disagreement with many of the well-intentioned amendments before us today, because I think they're all trying to undermine or damage the UK negotiating position, maybe inadvertently, One of my honourable friends says nonsense. Let me explain why it is dangerous if some of these amendments were adopted. We are invited to believe that if the House of Commons decided that it did not like the deal which the government had negotiated for our future relationship with the EU and voted it down, the rest of the EU would immediately turn around and say sorry and offer us a better deal. I just don't think that is practical politics. I don't understand how they believe that that is going to happen. But what could happen is that those in the rest of the EU who want to keep the UK and her contributions in the EU might think it was a rather good idea to offer a very poor deal to try and tempt the Parliament into voting the deal down so that then there was no deal at all, which might suit their particular agenda. I'm very happy to give vote.
Why is he so worried about the House of Commons having a vote at the end of the day? His analysis may be right. Isn't it right?
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4,
we have
5.
a choice, informed or otherwise. What's wrong with that? Why is he scared?
Mr. Engel, I'm supporting the government offering this House a vote, and the government can't deny the House a vote. If the House wants to vote, the House will vote. But it is very important that those who want to go further and press the government to even more of this approach should understand that it could be let me deal with one point at a time. It could be deeply damaging to the United Kingdom negotiating position. And
right, well, let's pull away from John Redwood. Let's return to Vicky Young, who's inside the House of Commons. The confusion is basically the government saying it won't seek further negotiations with the EU if Parliament votes down its proposed Brexit deal.
Yeah, that's right. Parliament and MPs have been pushing to have what they call a meaningful vote. So what they're saying is they don't want to just be here rubber stamping a deal that's already been signed off by Theresa May in the European Parliament. They want the ability, if they don't like it, to send her back to the negotiating table. So when David Jones, the minister, first got up, he made it sound like a very significant concession. The Labour front bench actually welcomed it as such. But since then, on more questioning of the minister, I think MPs aren't quite so happy. Let's discuss it a bit more with Labour's Chuka Umunna, who joins me now. What do you make of it? What do you make of this? Is it a concession?
I'm not encouraged by what we've just heard. I've just dashed over here to speak to you from the chamber. There are three problems with what your viewers will have just seen in the exchanges between the Minister and other members of Parliament. And I should say the concerns about this have been brought up not just by Labour members, but well-known Conservatives like Kenneth Clarke, the former Chancellor. First of all, we want government to come to Parliament and consult Parliament before a final deal is reached. Now, obviously, there are different ways you can do that. You can wait till you've almost got a fait accompli, which is completely sorted, and then present it to Parliament, and Parliament is left with no time to object or to perhaps send the government back to think again. I'll come back to that. Or when heads of terms, if you like, the principal points of a deal with our European partners have been reached, at that point you come to Parliament before you finally conclude it. And I think, in respect to what I've just said there, come to Parliament before it's finally concluded is not what we have just heard there, which is what we want. The second thing is in terms of Parliament having the opportunity to send the government back to the negotiation table if we don't like the deal that they have come to Britain with, because it's unacceptable. And of course the big hole in this is if the government decides to do no deal, we don't get a say on that. And just to put it into context for your viewers, if we didn't do a trade deal with the European Union, with whom we can trade at the moment tariff-free, it would mean that we would trade with them on what are called World Trade Organization rules, which govern that kind of situation. And to put it into context, what that means for our businesses, for our cars, you're looking at 10% tariff on top of the cost of a car, which is not there now. You're looking at more than 10% on your clothes. For some of our agriculture, our farmers, you're looking at up to 40% on some meats. Now, that is a decision not to do a deal and to go on to trading with our EU partners on those rules. That is not acceptable to be just left to government with us being a spectator.
You think Parliament should have a say on that? Now, what David Jones said, actually, that the vote would be about our future relationship with the European Union as well as the withdrawal deal. Did you understand what he meant by that? Because initially I took that to mean that's exactly what he's talking about, what happens at the end.
There are two parts to the deal, and I'm going to kind of describe it in non-technical terms and probably will get told off for doing so. But one part of it is the divorce settlement. You know, where this marriage between the UK and the EU institution is going to break up. And you know know when there's a divorce, there has to be a settlement. So there's a question of how much do we pay into the European Union for all the ongoing costs that maybe they have incurred as a result of our membership after we've left. So that's one part of the deal. Let's call that part A. Part B is the trade deal that we do with them after we've left, because of course they're not going to allow us to trade on the same terms and have all the same benefits that we have whilst being a member once we have left. And it's that thing that is really exercising colleagues, and I just, in my own exchange with the minister just now, have brought up, well, if you don't do a deal and you're just going to flip onto trading on World Trade Organization rules, that in itself is a decision. And that's something that Parliament should be consulted on. Let's not forget...
And you don't think they've given way on that?
I don't think they have, no. And let's not forget, this isn't about relitigating the EU referendum debate that your viewers would have probably got fed up hearing about in the lead into the 23rd of June. This is about reasserting parliamentary sovereignty and ensuring that Parliament isn't just a spectator in this process, but that we actually have a role. But of course, this is the first part of the debate today. The second part of the debate is looking at the impact, which we'll be having from 5 o'clock this afternoon, of an EU exit, what the impact will be on the public finances. And people will remember that pledge on that big red bus that the Vote Leave cabinet ministers like Boris Johnson were telling you that if we leave the European Union, £350 million extra per week will go into the NHS. That is going to be debated today. It's been ruled in scope by the Speaker, and hopefully we'll have a vote on it. And your viewers will be able to see whether those who promised all that money to the NHS will make good on their promise, or whether they will betray you.
Chuka Umunna, thank you very much indeed. So now we will have to see with this vote, Labour MPs clearly still not happy by what the government has said, what Conservative MPs make of it. The vote will come just after 6 o'clock.